Over the last few years, we had been studying various texts of the Upanishads in the Sunday classes while pursuing the study of the synthesis of yoga on Fridays, and we completed Pondicherry on the Kena Upanishad last time that we met. In looking forward to what to take up next, we had many options, including a deeper study of Sri Aurobindo's commentaries on the Vedas and focusing on certain aspects or deities, which would be fascinating and important. But in making a choice, I settled on the last 6 chapters of the Life Divine. And I want to put this in context. We are at a time of such large, unprecedented changes in the world, where the balance between the spiritual evolutionary breakthrough and the possibility of regression and collapse of civilization is on the edge. Every day counts, every effort counts, and it is in order to assist this breakthrough that the avatar came and is working today, still behind the appearances. Sri Aurobindo gave this lavish spread of spiritual experience as his gift to assist this movement on the more surface parts of our being. But we do not have enough time even to study all of Sri Aurobindo's texts, to go in depth to master them. The way he lived them is the work of many lifetimes, and we need necessarily have to focus on some things in urgency for the purpose of our evolution, even as we dwell on others at leisure for the purpose of our personal growth or satisfaction. In describing the text of the Life Divine, the Mother once, on many occasions in fact, recommended that instead of reading the whole of the text, which is essential for the full development of the mind and the mind's understanding of things, for those who do not feel aligned to that, to read the last 6 chapters, which dwell on the specific form and process of the integral yoga and the immediate next movement of human evolution. And so it is this which I wish to take up on the in the Sunday studies, but because the text is also much longer, more detailed and complex, I propose that we extend the duration of the Sunday classes by another half hour, so that we start on at 6 o'clock and complete as usual at 7:30. And so from next Sunday we will be beginning at 6 p.m. The text itself of the last 6 chapters, you will see, follows a certain framework where the first of these 6 is called Man and Evolution, where Sri Aurobindo describes the essential evolutionary processes and principles and how they operate in the human evolution, how they have operated, how they are working today, but specifically what form or what role they play in the next step of human evolution. The next chapter is titled The Evolution of the Spiritual Man, which then enters the proper process of the spiritual evolution itself. And then in the next chapter, the triple transformation, we come to the specifics of the transformation of consciousness and of nature. And the next chapter is the ascent towards supermind, which shows this transformative process now lifted to the supramental working, which is, well, the immediate focus of our evolution. And the next chapter, the Gnostic being, describes that consciousness in which this next step of evolution lives and how it operates in its collective, in the development of spiritual communities, and the difficulties that it will face in these workings. And finally, the divine life, which culminates this discussion. And so before we begin man and evolution and the evolution, there is a remnant of the previous chapter which I wish to take up. And the previous chapter was titled Rebirth and Other Worlds, Karma, the Soul and Immortality, where he has dwelt on many aspects of the karmic process, the soul's evolution. But this last portion is immortality, which I want to begin with. And so we are actually beginning with the last portion of the previous chapter before we take up the proper 6 chapters of our focus. And the reason for this is that this last portion places our current effort in context. Our current effort is limited on 2 fronts. The first is a lack of clarity of the nature of the effort. We are not conscious even of things happening within us, and so even to redirect, modify or intensify them is not so accessible, and the clarity is something which grows as we proceed. But the second problem is one of time. We do not have enough time in a human lifetime to be able to take it through all the way that is intended across these chapters. The mother made these observations that for the purpose of taking the transformation of consciousness all the way to its completion into a physical transformation, one lifetime is not enough. There is a need to extend this duration, which can be done, of course, in 2 ways. The first of which she has hinted at, and which will perhaps become more obvious in the coming few years or decades, that human lifespan itself could be extended somehow. The knowledge for this, the means, has been explored in past traditions, is being explored today again in many ways through the newfound knowledge of genetics and the understanding of the deeper working of the cellular consciousness from a technological or physical perspective. And these also will participate in the work. But the key will still be the ability to extend effectively your personality and consciousness and knowledge across several physical lives. And it is to this that the mother points. She says the most urgent requirement is to be able to develop this power of awareness such that even as we shed this physical body and take on another, we are able to continue in the personality, so that the work that is done does not need to be restarted, and the time wasted in the first 20 years simply to become aware as an organized individual, followed by another 20 years to amplify and develop your powers of nature, all of those can be enormously reduced, and the work itself continued into the next as early as possible. And in this way, perhaps 3 or 4 lifetimes, Mother suggests, it should be possible to complete this work. Now this suggestion Sri Aurobindo develops upon in this part of the chapter, which is in fact the last few paragraphs. It first begins by examining the right relationship between we as a soul in evolution and we as the personality with which we are most obviously associated. that the soul itself survives the transition of death and rebirth. It is that which is in fact taking the journey. But what happens to the rest of the personality? What of that, if any, is carried forward, and what can be done to include more of that into the carry forward process? So this is the portion which I want to dwell upon, and it will probably take a few days of study before we move to the proper last 6 chapters of the Life Divine. He has just discussed earlier in this chapter on Rebirth and Other Worlds the common misunderstanding of karma as a process of reward and punishment, and he dismisses that, shows its larger universal framework. And he comes now to this question of the relationship of who it is that is making the transition and its relationship with the personality. This brings us to another element of the ordinary conception of rebirth, which is not acceptable, since it is an obvious error of the physical mind. The idea of the soul itself as a limited personality which survives unchanged from one birth to another. And this is a wrong idea, that the soul is this I personality with this particular way of thinking and feeling, habits, and so the next birth should be a replica of this. And this is wrong, and it comes from the physical mind which sees this as all in our individuality. He explains, this too simple and superficial idea of the soul and personality is born of the physical mind's inability to look beyond its own apparent self-formation in this single existence. So because I think this is all I am, so this is all that can survive, I, as the surface mind, looking at my body as the personality, am unable to see deeper to other layers which are more essentially me. In its conception, what returns in the incarnation, what returns in the reincarnation, must be not only the same spiritual being, the same psychic entity, but the same formation of nature that inhabited the body of the last birth. The body changes. So in the new birth, the body changes. The circumstances are different. But the form of the being, the mind, the character, the disposition, temperament, tendencies are the same. That's the idea that it should be. John Smith in his new life is the same John Smith that he was in his last avatar. At least that's the expectation. But if that were so, there would be no spiritual utility or meaning at all in rebirth. Then you might as well continue in the same body. Why shed and replace? For there would be the repetition of the same little personality, the same small mental and vital formation to the end of time. Imagine how difficult it would be if in a personality, in a particular life, the personality has acquired a warped tendency, some distortion, some perversion, which it is unable to get free of. Well, you are as if bound to it across lives, which will be pointless. And the highlight here is of the smallness and limitation of the personality. For the growth of the embodied being towards the full stature of its reality, not only a new experience, but a new personality, is indispensable. If you want that growth, you have to have a new personality. Because the spectrum of life possibilities is so large, a single personality can only explore one facet of it in a single lifetime. In order to be able to explore other facets, which this personality is not capable of, you have to have a different personality. If in one life this soul chooses to explore the experience of transactional relationships, finances, and a wide, rich, complex networking personality, it cannot experience the life of isolation and one-pointed focus separate from the large mix and entanglement in human life. It cannot explore a life which is dedicated to self-sacrifice to a greater ideal. It cannot explore anything which is fundamentally different from this complex which binds the personality and makes it unable now to do those other things. And so it has then to take birth with a new personality now, more pensive, more introspective, less engaging perhaps outwardly, more indrawn as it explores deeper possibilities and experiences. At that point, it finds it difficult now to engage with other people to build complex and lasting relationships, because the temperament is totally different and the line of development is different. And therefore, you need for personalities which need to be tried out in different types, formations across lives, to build over time a broad enough spectrum of experience that the full lessons of the richness of life can be absorbed and even over time integrated, taking place across lives again for the purpose of integration. Personality is only a temporary mental, vital, physical formation which the being, the real person, the psychic entity puts forward on the surface. It is not the self in its abiding reality. So now first step of that relationship is this. There is the real person, capital P, the psychic entity. And then there are the three layers, mental, vital, physical. And this real person puts forward on the surface the temporary formations on these three levels. But when the person comes back into its rest, its lasting character, the abiding reality, it is this inner real person, the psychic entity, which is the real you. The layers of formation have been put forward as if imprinted on substance which is not it. And therefore the analogy of clothing becomes obvious. You have inner wear a bunian inside. Upon that you have a clothing of your normal shirt, which perhaps you reveal to people. The inner acts as a protective layer within. And then upon that you put a third layer of a coat or a thick pullover or sweater to protect from the cold. This third layer is the most rigid, required for protection. The second layer is more expressive of you, and the inner is left at a deeper personal level which, well, you don't express, but it is always supporting from behind, not seen by others, obviously. And they are like clothing, layers put upon. And in each, there is an imprint, a formation put forward on the surface. Now this idea is very important. From within, there is the putting forward onto these three layers. The immediate suggestion is, when the soul enters the body, it brings with it already a certain formation or a tendency which it puts into these or imprints into these. Now how far this goes depends on the maturity of the soul. A less mature soul will simply carry whatever is developed in it, step into the physical body, and whatever it brings somehow imprints automatically and forms a certain frame. A more mature soul may preside over that process consciously at an earlier stage, even before birth. May preside over the formation and development of the fetus, infusing in it certain tendencies and giving it a certain direction, even to the extent of shaping its form And in such cases, the child will be born with an appearance quite distinct from its parents. We may see elements of resemblance, and yet there will be something quite distinct. But much more than the physical imprint is the mental and vital imprints, the mind and energy imprints of its nature, which it infuses even at that early stage, which can change the physical form again. If you make the body capable of holding larger quantum of energy, will the body form and process will suitably have to be reshaped, or will get reshaped inevitably. And the child from birth, you will discover, has an unusual character of vitality, or an unusual curiosity, or whatever form it takes, and a direction to it. And parents often comment, when the child is much older, maybe in teenage or even in late adulthood, the parents will say, these tendencies we saw in the child even while he or she was in the cradle. Interesting. The way the child kicks its arms and legs, or calls or demands from its parents to be serviced. I am hungry, I demand that you service me now. See that vital force that demands and is upset if you do not immediately obey is an imprint of character which is already there in a body which is unable to express it other than in this manner. Or the vitality may be very quiet and still, and it feels a need, it feels discomfort, it makes some noises, and it waits patiently for the parents to come. And this particular turn of nature was already set, and was set by the general turn of the soul's intention, and stays through most of the life. The mind, as it responds, you ring a bell or wave something nice, make faces, move your fingers before the child, it laughs and smiles. Or another child expresses some distress. That shows already a direction of development. Or it is curious, it reaches out, studies, and you can see it's trying to think. And again, that sets a direction which you can see there that will define the turn of the whole of the life. And so it's interesting how that initial infusion that the soul brings actually stays as the base for the whole journey and can be recognized at that point. So the psychic entity puts forward on the surface. So from the experience of the soul, these are surface layers. Itself is in the depth, covered in these. In each return to earth, the person, the Purusha, makes a new formation, builds a new personal quantum suitable for a new experience, for a new growth of its being. Quantum, specific measure, quantity, cut out. And the suggestion here, which has massive implications, that in the personality, in the person, in the totality of the person, which has built up, let's say, over hundreds of lives or thousands of lives, so many facets, it doesn't put it all in front. It selects a quantum of this to put forward for this life experience. Now, you may have, for example, been through a lifetime of a genius level performance of music on a particular instrument. That ability inherently, the essence of that ability is part of the soul experience. But it may not bring it forward at all in this lifetime. Or it may bring forward only as much of it as is necessary for the harmonization of that musical artistry into the mind's rational development. And just that much. And so what will happen in this personality as the child grows? It will briefly demonstrate unusual skill or comfort with music and a musical intelligence, but it will not be interested in developing it. Parent will want more. And some element of that brief exposure will remain always as a supporting artistic nuance or subtlety of mind in that new development, which may be of a completely different kind of life. But there's a choice of what quantum of the richness of what is developed is actually put forward for this personality. Now you can see how much more complex the actual experience is for the soul. So he says, in each return to earth, the person, the Purusha, capital P, makes a new formation. complete fresh, here's the formation. From what? Builds a new personal quantum suitable for a new experience. And then, of course, for a new growth of its being. Who's going to grow? Not the personality and the framework put forward, itself as the person who's going to grow. And this is the framework it chooses. Then, when it passes from its body, it keeps still the same vital and mental form for a time. But the forms or sheaths dissolve, and what is kept is only the essential elements of the past quantum, of which some will, but some may not be used in the next incarnation. Now what happens when you have completed this? You have just shed the physical, gross physical body, you have still perhaps some imprint of the subtle physical body, which is also rapidly dissolving. You have the vital and mental bodies, which are still there for a while, until they begin to also dissolve. So the practical experience at the time of separation is, okay, my gross body has fallen, but I am still the same John Smith personality. And then afterwards it's as if, oh, this narrow aspect of my John Smith emotional frame is now beginning to thin out. I feel myself released, widening, freed up. That tendency to be obsessed with certain things begins to dissolve. My mind suddenly feels released and widened, as if it was compressed and now it's decompressed. The nature of the exact experience varies according to the type of personality, but still the sense of release as these rigidifying components fall away. What remains? Even the specifics of experience will fade out. The names, the kinds of food you were attached to, have relevance only at the physical vital consciousness. In the mental body, the sense of wanting pure food, the sense of eating as a sacred experience, that will remain. But the moment you've shed the physical and vital, the particular attachment to food types is gone. What remains is these deeper values, if at all they had any role in this particular life. If you have spent a whole life in struggle, the sense of conquest, the sense of overcoming, the sense that whatever the challenge life throws, I have the capacity to overcome. I can draw out from myself that strength. That remains as a capacity, as an imprint. And so the sheaths dissolve, the forms dissolve, the essential elements of the past quantum remain, of which some will be used in the next incarnation, but some may not be used. So I've developed all this. How much is useful? Much of it may go back into my repository of the overall growth, but some parts now, yes, this is relevant. It's interesting often when you look at the way the soul chooses the new formation of life, it draws little pieces from other lives. Little pieces which may have suddenly no obvious relationship to this personality. But when you look at the nature of the consciousness, you see a connection. So in one life, a soul has spent time developing a relationship with the energies within crystals as part of some training in the energetic or occult realm. And then it's gone. Many lives later, suddenly there is this as if link of that comes in. And in this new personality, the person has an unusual liking for collecting beautiful crystals which have a pure energy quality. It has no other function in the life, it's just there. If you think about it, what the soul has retained or brought forward or has come forward spontaneously is something of that connection with material nature and the sense of the pure material energy represented in the beauty of the crystalline form. And it relates to the nature of the work done for this life in matter, where it wants to bring some higher ideals into matter, and somehow this as a resonance from that life remains. You're no more engaging with the energy of the crystals, just the beauty and purity that they radiate, because it's relevant for this. And you take that away, nothing of the work changes. It just happens to be a tiny flicker of that connection. And so when one actually ends up looking back at all the past lives and their relationship, there are these such interesting little nuances which pop up, adding to the richness. and reminding you that all this special focus of this life has behind it so much more. We began our study of the last 6 chapters of Sri Aurobindo's book, The Life Divine, last Sunday. And our purpose in this, we can reiterate. In these last 6 chapters, Sri Aurobindo summarizes the broad framework of the effort of the integral yoga and the passage of transition into the new consciousness upon which a new humanity has to be established, and the collective forms and life of that humanity that need to be developed through that passage. This we have taken up with a certain urgency of focus for each one of us in the present circumstances of life. There is a demand to be able to rise above our present state of consciousness and evolution, in order, if nothing else, simply to survive the pressures of present life, but more urgently the necessity for that transition for the human race as a whole. Rather than beginning with these 6 chapters, we took a step behind to the chapter just before, and the end part of it, titled Rebirth and Other Worlds. And the reason for this is so that we may understand more deeply the distinction between the true person that we are and the personality which is this on the surface that we think ourselves to be, in order that we may harmonize these two sufficiently to allow for a continuation across lives of this sense of purpose and effort for which we are here. And this was the reason why we took a part of this chapter for our study. Here, in the portion that we have not read, Sri Aurobindo has already discussed the broad sense of karma and its role in the development of personality. And the portion we read last time, he makes a distinction between the soul which is permanent within and the personality which it puts out for the purpose of life experience. And he says the idea that a person so born must now take the same personality into the next life is not only irrational but also very simplistic from the perspective of evolution. For the purpose of evolution, what is put out is a new personality in which a completely new experience can be had. And across lives, the true soul, the true person within, puts forward completely different personalities as necessary for the line of experience that it has chosen. For example, at a certain phase of human development, there was great possibility of experiences for development of heroism and courage, and a personality would be put out appropriate for that kind of experience and development. And having exhausted the possibilities of development, then the soul may say, but now I want to experience a life of service, of quietness, of deep introspection and inner concentration rather than external conquest and achievement. But a personality which is driven to surface dynamic expression is not useful for that kind of life. And so it sets aside those tendencies, brings forward other tendencies from its inner store, forms a new personality suited for this, and has that life experience. Now, across a series of lives, different kinds of personalities put out, each one is as if reabsorbed in its essence, not in its details. In the portion we have already read, he explains how, in passing from the body, for a while the same vital and mental layers of the subtle bodies may remain, and then even those dissolve. The moment you have shed the physical body, everything tied to the physical body would also be dropped. Imprints and impressions which were received in the physical body but received by the inner consciousness would be retained as impressions and imprints only. So in a new life, in a new birth, I may find that somehow I have a natural skill for playing a certain instrument. And what is retained is not the personality, but the impression in the physical consciousness of that skill. But only as an impression. I still need to train to make it perfect. Similarly, when the vital body is shed, the elements of the vital personality and its human relationships, those also fade out. In the act of leaving from the physical body, at first the soul may look and feel the closeness of personal relations with those you have left behind. But as that layer dissolves, even that fades, and you feel those relationships fade away until practically nothing remains of that except the imprint and impression of the sharing of experiences of love, of affection, of caring, sharing. And occasionally, if there was a deeper link of the soul relation with another, something of that may remain also. And the same with the mind's formations being dissolved. All the rich training that you have made of your intelligence, of the specifics of knowledge, of specifics of information, all these fade away. What remains is the overall imprint of the skill and the capacity, the pliability, the flexibility that the mind has developed, the skill of handling knowledge and analyzing or synthesizing, developing insights, the intuitivization that has taken place in the mind. These would remain as imprints or quality of consciousness. And this would remain in the soul as it absorbs the overall imprint of the life and goes into a state of rest. We discussed last time on the return, it puts out some elements of this, drawing out what is necessary for the purpose of the life. Sri Aurobindo points out, essential elements of the past may be kept, but some will be kept, some may not be used in the next incarnation. And as it draws out elements, it has the full store of all impressions from all past personalities which are available. Of that, whatever is relevant is drawn out to form the new shape of the personality. But it will not be a replica of the old personality. It can even be completely opposite, completely different tendencies. Or potentials may be ready to emerge, or something already in action but inchoate may have been held back in the last life, which needed to be worked out, but was kept over for a later and more suitable combination of the possibilities of the nature. Things like this, which were worked upon, taken as far as they could at that time, but then were left waiting for a greater opportunity, those come forward. As an example, if you watch children today playing with computer screens or tablets or mobile phones, it is surprising at the pace at which they pick up the skill of using these devices, and what older adults find difficult to learn, they catch on their own without you needing to teach anything. It shows that at some past stage of human development, the possibility of the mind rapidly using such devices or developing such skills had been taken as far as it could with the tools available then, and now that possibility comes up with new terms, new forms, new technologies, but the same skills rapidly developing, building upon the past to capture them. Sri Aurobindo has a very suggestive observation in the same text of the Life Divine, in its earlier chapters. He says, if you observe how humanity has rapidly picked up the power of the intellect in the last, let's say, 100 or 200 years, humanity as a whole. You cannot explain this merely by the current idea of small evolutionary steps. If you go back barely 200 or 300 years ago, the people who had developed the power of the intellect to some extraordinary degree were very few, and they were looked upon as an elite. And yet in the last 100 years, people coming out of traditions which have completely neglected or lost the training of the intelligence, they come out, and within a generation or two, suddenly you pick up the same equal skill of intellect as anywhere else on earth in large masses. How do you explain that? And he says you have to go back to an earlier phase of human evolution where the intelligence was taken to a degree of development similar to the present. And then it had moved on to an intuitive age, and in the intuitive age something was left as if incomplete, and the human evolutionary surge dropped back to pick up once again and integrate with the rational mind. So what we pride ourselves on today as the modern development of intelligence, which you see so widespread, is only a picking up of something developed. And if you look at the cycles of time, it could be about 10 or 12,000 years ago, before that intuitive rise. And in fact, we are catching up with an earlier stage of evolution, if anything, except we are now more deeply integrating the intellect into the intuitive. And imagine what it means for the soul. We have prepared certain lines of experience then, and then they had to be set aside while other lines developed because of lack of opportunity. And then again it's brought forward, and those elements from 10,000 years ago come forward, other elements from the last 5 or 1,000 years, 500 or 1,000 years, elements relevant for the present. Almost all of us present here have had lives dedicated to a spiritual pursuit. We would not find ourselves so inclined with this kind of commitment if that was not the case. Those lives have been through ascetic phases of complete withdrawal from the world. They've been through phases of rich devotional outpouring of various kinds across many traditions or cultures or even religions. We have had phases where the same spiritual turn might have taken a very different form from the devotional, in taking a form of pure service or deep intellectual pursuit. And all of these elements, imprints, those tendencies of consciousness are as if they're behind to be drawn forward by the soul in forming the present mold of the personality. How much is available would determine the richness of possibilities in this lifetime. It doesn't mean everything is brought forward. And here we come to a very important idea that he says, all the past is indeed there, but its accelerated impetus and potentialities for the formation of the future. But all of it is not ostensibly present and active. So it's all there, you don't have to bring it all in front. This ostensibly present and active, it's a very interesting word. If we view it in the modern understanding, ostensible is what you put up as a front, as a pretense, as an appearance, but not what is real. What is pretentious but unreal as compared to what is behind. But if you go to the root, and Sri Aurobindo, remember, is a master of Greek and Latin, you have to go to the root of the word ostensible, and it comes from the Latin ob and tendere, that is in front, extended, stretched out. Now you read the same sentence, ostensibly present and active, stretched out in front. So from the personality's side, all this is behind, and stretched out in front is a selection of possibilities, which forms your present personality, to which is given an accelerated push forward. for future formation. Remember, from the soul's perspective, the past does not matter. What matters is what is developed from it, relevant for the future. And he will be discussing this shortly. But for our purpose now, for this life and the work to be done, the rich base built up is essential. And he gives you now an extraordinary statement. It's a rich and complex statement with 4 different characteristics that he describes, all of which prepare us for the new breakthrough in evolution. The greater the variety of formations that have existed in the past and can be utilized, first. The more rich and multitudinous the accumulated buildings of experience, second. The more their essential result of capacity for knowledge, power, action, character, manifold response to the universe can be brought forward and harmonized in the new births. Fourth. All these things, the more they are there, the more numerous the veiled personalities, mental, vital, subtle, physical, that combine to enrich the new personality on the surface. The greater and more opulent will be that personality, and the nearer to the possible transition out of the completed mental stage of evolution to something beyond it. Now you see the whole thrust of this evolutionary effort across lives. It is in order to complete the mental evolution as thoroughly as possible, preparing for a still higher spiritual step in evolution. And for this, the personality possibilities in front should be greater and more opulent, and that makes it also nearer to the possible transition out of the mental stage into the higher supramental evolution. Sri Aurobindo has used this word opulent. The greater and more opulent will be that personality. And again, opulent we understand very loosely to mean rich and wealthy. But if you go back to the Latin root, it has a very specific sense. The op is a similar root as opus, which is work. And opulent, which gives the sense of abundance, is tied to the work which leads to abundance. So you go back to the root, opulence has the sense to work hard to produce great abundance. You see the word usage of this word now. All the work of the past is that hard work. How many millions of years perhaps that the journey has been going on, of which we remember nothing here on the surface. All that hard work is behind working or present now to produce this rich possibility in the present. And so let's review what are those large 4 facets that he describes which make us ready for the new step in evolution. First, he said, the greater the variety of formations that have existed in the past and can be utilized. So it would be quite a meaningless journey if the soul had kept a very narrow range of possibilities. If you look at your personality today, and that's the limitation of the personality, you fear so many things. If you were asked now, would you like to go bungee jumping? Would you like to go climb Mount Everest? No, that's not for me. Let's let those courageous people do it. I don't like to risk my life. That's this personality. And the soul could put forward a personality which is, oh yeah, I would love to do that. And that personality and its explorations and the essence of that adventurousness, if it has been worked on, is actually available for this life, or is an aspect which fills this life. Although in this personality I may not like to go climb Mount Everest, that adventurousness may take a different form in my mind's explorations, in my heart's relations, in a person who's a businessman taking a leap in an unknown field of creation. But the same tendency, the same power of consciousness and richness developed is available. So across those lives to have made as broad and rich a tapestry of development possible would make you prepared for the step beyond in evolution. And he says very subtly, the greater the variety of formations, it's not how many lives you had, it's the variety of range here. And how much of that can be utilized for the present? You see, some of it may not be sufficiently developed to be brought forward to be utilized. Just having bungee jumped once is not enough to create and develop an imprint of the adventurousness. The second characteristic, the more rich and multitudinous the accumulated buildings of experience. And so the soul necessarily will have gone through many different kinds of cultures across time, experienced different types of ways of thinking, ways of relating, ways of living. And that range and that variety accumulated together to build the experience. And third, the more their essential result of capacity. Now, I may have gone through a very hard life, but have I developed the capacity now to overcome in the face of challenges? Maybe I slipped. Have I overcome at some point eventually? And if so, that remains. Now, this is something very important that the mother has observed in a different context. She says, if you observe in life, it's easy to find joy in satisfying your desires. I feel like having ice cream, I feel like doing this, or hitting somebody, or doing some mischief. You feel an impulse of desire, you follow, you satisfy, you have some joy of it, whatever duration, brief, superficial character. But she says, far greater is the joy of being able to overcome the desire. And this is something interesting. When you have actually struggled with a desire that came and you knew it was not quite the best, it was not the best time or the best form, or even the desire was somewhat perverse, instead of giving in to it, if you have actually been able to hold and rise above the desire, and been able to do something which frees you even from that attachment to the desire, the joy that it gives is the character of the joy of the soul, having conquered something, having taken a step forward in consciousness, having developed a new capacity which was not there before. And this will stay. This will be carried by the soul into the next life. The momentary satisfaction of desires has no value in itself and will leave no imprint that is worth keeping. And so the things where you have overcome and conquered and developed a capacity of growth, of mastering, or at least managing what? And he gives a range of facets of life experience. The more the essential result of capacity for knowledge, power, action, character, and last, manifold response to the universe. So you may see here Maheshwari, Mahakali, Saraswati action in the aspect of action. These are all facets or the fourfold powers of the soul which have been developed to whatever degree in the past. And what is important is that this is brought forward as a capacity. And then he gives a very interesting requirement, manifold response to the universe. If you look at it from the soul's perspective, every time that you enter the birth, what are you entering? From a state of withdrawal from action in deep rest, and then returning to enter the universe. And entering the physical universe, it's as if you are faced with the challenges of all the other levels. You could have entered only in the mental part of the worlds and had a limited experience. But entering the physical world means everything here is embedded. And what are you facing? The whole universe. And what's the soul's journey? Wandering through the experiences that the universe throws at you. And as it wanders, utilizing those experiences for its growth. and for its service to the divine unfolding or manifestation in the universe. And that's all there is to it. Growth of your consciousness, growth of the divine consciousness in the world. In what? The domain is the universe. And the things thrown by the universe are as if opportunities or challenges. What kind of response can you give to those challenges? If you look at a less developed personality, it may look at this and feel overwhelmed and choose to narrow itself to a very small band of possible response and engagement. Or a more developed personality in a larger capacity will accept all the challenges thrown in, or a large part of them, and be able to respond appropriately to each situation that comes. And such people will naturally take up a role which has a significant influence in human affairs. It's as if you can throw anything at them and they will find a way to respond and appropriately as necessary for that situation. So this is the capacity which is developed to respond to the universe, but a manifold, multifaceted, rich response. So I'll review this phrase. The more their essential result of capacity for knowledge, power, action, character, manifold response to the universe can be brought forward and harmonized in the new birth. Now all of these have been developed, they are brought forward and harmonized so that they work as one personality, not many pieces. And then the last fourth. The more numerous the veiled personalities, mental, vital, subtle, physical, that combine to enrich the new personality on the surface. And this is something very interesting. If you look into yourself, you will, and if you're asked to describe what are all the different facets of your personality, you may say, somebody may say, oh, I am a painter, I am a musician, there's a part of me that loves this play of music. I may not be skilled in this lifetime, that doesn't matter, but what are the facets? Oh, I'm an adventurer, I'm a scientist, I'm inquisitive, I have this fascination with mountains, I have this fascination with flowers, whatever specific aspect. Each of these may be a facet of personality developed across lives. How many richly formed personalities are there within you? And some of these may be very specialized. They may have to deal with things of the mind. For example, in the mental personality, I may be a scientist with a very mechanistic exploration. Or I may be a computer programmer which is completely non-mechanical in its expression. Or in my mind, I may be a philosopher, and it would be a different aspect. So within the mental, there are facets of personality. Within the vital nature, again, there are facets of personality. Strong leadership, or simply lone adventurer, or networker, or in the subtle physical also. It's a very important suggestion here that at the level of the physical body, the things that you develop primarily are held in the deeper layers of the physical, what Sri Aurobindo calls the subtle physical or inner physical. And that's where you build certain facets of personality. In fact, these facets can also influence the form of your body when the personality takes birth. Occasionally you will see there is in the family a strong resemblance across everybody, and one child stands out to be completely different in personality. And often it's because the soul can bring an element of the physical consciousness developed and imprint that into the fetus and into the physical form also. But there are elements like this of skills in the physical body or turn of the physical consciousness which also form distinct personalities. All of these can be brought forward. So the more numerous the veiled personalities that combine to enrich the new personality on the surface. Now it's not enough that you've had many, it's that many can be brought forward now and combined. So this makes for the last characteristic. Now the more rich possibilities are brought forward, the more Sri Aurobindo says we are now ready to complete this phase of evolution. The greater and more opulent, you see all the work done leading to the richness, will be the personality, and the nearer to the possible transition out of the completed mental stage of evolution to something beyond it. For all of us present here, we have to take this as relevant for us. We would not be here otherwise. If the soul had a choice to, and it recognized the need for developing further personalities or facets of its exploration, it would take a life which had that specific focus. That it has chosen a life where it is attracted to a broad, not only spiritual development, but a large fulfillment of the spiritual potential, is itself a sign that we are ready for the leap in evolution. Such a complexity and gathering up of many personalities in one person can be a sign of a very advanced stage of the individual's evolution, when there is a strong central being that holds all together and works towards harmonization and integration of the whole many-sided movement of the nature. Now, again, when we say many, the many can be relative, but the point is all those many are brought together. But he says it suggests also that there is a strong central being. Now, Sri Aurobindo's vocabulary here, central being, is that aspect of the self which presides over the development of the soul's evolution. It is the self, the one self. There is only one self. But the one self turns to support this line of evolution for this soul, that line of evolution for another soul. But the same self supporting, standing behind, presiding over, is what Sri Aurobindo refers to as central being. It's an aspect that it puts forward, or which is present, to support the soul that is put forward in its journey of evolution. And each of these different outlooks of the self is as if supporting the journey. The station of the central being is above the head, where the individual consciousness opens to the cosmic, and from there it holds together the whole personality and presides over the journey across lives. When there is a rich, multifaceted personality, it is the central being which holds it all together. And this, what he discusses here, is an advanced stage of the individual's evolution where the central being is strong. Not only it holds together all these, but works to integrate all these. In practice, for many of us, if there is this process of integration ongoing, you will find in your life complex challenges thrown your way. Your life is not simple. You have to face many different, often conflicting demands or influences. And you have to work somehow to synthesize, harmonize these in your nature to be able to deal with them seamlessly as one person. And that's generally a sign that there is a process of integration being developed. But then he explains, but this opulent taking up of the past would not be a repetition of personality. It would be a new formation and large consummation, brings to fulfillment all these efforts of the past. It is not as a machinery for the persistent renewal or prolongation of an unchanging personality that rebirth exists, but as a means for the evolution of the spiritual being in nature. Why is there this whole process of rebirth? Why did nature choose? She could have had one personality going on and on and on and on, potentially possible. We have in nature, there are certain creatures, marine creatures, which have effectively, they are immortal. There are other mammalian creatures, small ones, which effectively do not age. And these which are immortal, you can actually try to kill them, somehow they survive, they grow, they just continue. In principle, nature could have built life forms so that we continue for a long time. And there's a rationale behind it. What would be the use of having an unchanging personality stuck in a narrow experience? And so nature has made for this process of rebirth, for the evolution of the spiritual being, the whole focus is the soul, which is taking on these personalities for its growth. And it is for this purpose that the whole framework of rebirth is there. It is not for renewal or prolongation of an unchanging personality. Now this is a very important idea because we will come back to it a little later. For our purpose, as we discussed last time, we want to be able to create a continuity of effort, of spiritual effort, and take it across lives. Not have to forget when we take birth again and restart all over again. Can we not recall or draw consciously forward all the benefits of the past spiritual efforts so that they are present now? Can we not prolong this conscious effort of what we build in this lifetime into the next? So in some sense you see here a contradiction of purpose. Nature does not want you to extend your current limited personality. Your soul does not want to have that. And yet, if the soul has to grow, there comes a stage where the soul would need to be able to retain as completely as possible what is required for the new births without needing to forget and rebuild. How this is going to be resolved, we will see as we go along with the rest of the chapter. But Sri Aurobindo now brings us to another important idea. What is the wrong idea that we have about rebirth and its role? And there's a whole paragraph around this. And it is only so that we remove that idea once and for all. And then what is it that can be retained will be the next step. And we will see how it applies for us today. So we take the next paragraph now. It becomes at once evident that in this plan of rebirth, the false importance which our mind attaches to the memory of past lives disappears altogether. Now we have this idea, oh, I was so and so, or someone was so and so in the past life. I've had people come occasionally and say something, you know, you were somebody in your past life. I said, yes, and you were also somebody in your past life. So what? And someone says, aren't you curious what you were or what you were doing? And the normal tendency is, oh yeah, it would be. For what? How will it change what you're doing now? Well, it might be interesting to remember that I was X, Y, Z. And of course the fantasies that typically come up will be some famous personality. And what are you drawing that idea for? To feel important. But other than that, if you actually began to look back at your past lives, what does the soul retain? To take a very extreme example, not the food you had for breakfast. What relevance does it have? Not even elements of the culture or lifestyle of that period. All of us would have had lives where we drew water from the river or from the well. How did it help you? Unless that was a specific purpose in your life itself, but otherwise it has no value. What is it that you would bother to remember or recall for the purpose of this present life? The things which represent the progress of consciousness, the growth of the spiritual nourishment for the soul. The three words Sri Aurobindo draws on the Indian tradition for what the soul finds as nourishment. Satyam, Shivam and Sundaram. Satyam, the truth. Shivam, the sacred, the auspicious, the good. Sundaram is the beautiful. Beautiful not just in physical terms, but on all levels. There's a beauty of emotions. There's a beauty of thought. And into that, a sense of sacredness in the emotions, the sacredness in the thoughts or in your actions. And when that sacred thought, emotion or action is dedicated to serving something which is true, to spreading the good and the beautiful of the divine presence, things which lead to that growth, those are the things you will recall. So if actually you were to turn back, you would remember, for example, one of the lives in which the whole life was dedicated to serving a group of people who loved the divine. And you spent all your time in remembrance, in the joy of service to the divine. The specifics of what you did will not matter, but that sense of a total dedication and joy of service to the divine, that would remain. Yes, elements of fragments where the soul's influence came strongly forward would be there as a few fleeting images, but that's about all. If you review your current life from this perspective, how much of what you do today will you actually find worthwhile to carry over into the next? It's a very provocative question. Introspect on this, and you'll suddenly discover 90% of what we do, 90% of the things we consider important that we chase after will not matter. It'll make no difference to you when you look back and say, what do I want to take from here? And the few things which for you are important, consider how little time or importance you give to them. You know it's important for you, but how much importance are you able to give to it? Because all the rest is cluttering your time and your attention. And it's worth reviewing and then reprioritizing. So when the question comes of past births, we realize that the false importance our mind attaches to the memory of past lives disappears altogether, because what is relevant for this personality that you have today and what's relevant for the soul in its evolution? Very little. And what is already there. That's all you need. The specifics are not important. If indeed rebirth were governed by a system of rewards and punishment, if life's whole intention were to teach the embodied spirit to be good and moral, that's the idea we normally have. Supposing that is the intention in the dispensation of karma, and it is not what it looks like in this presentation of it, a mechanical law of recompense and retribution without any reformatory meaning or purpose, then there is evidently a great stupidity and injustice in denying to the mind in its new incarnation all memory of its past births and actions. It's a long sentence, but what he is saying basically is this. We won't go too much in detail of the nuances, but basically, if the whole purpose was to be good and to suffer the good and bad consequences of karma for your being good or bad in your past, then it would be great injustice that you don't remember what you did. You see, you're suffering in some situation in life today, and someone will say, oh, that's because of your past bad karmas. You caused suffering to others and now you're suffering now. But I don't remember. Why are you making me suffer for something which I don't remember? Why do you deny me the memory? At least if I remembered what I did, then I could correct for it now. Why deny that opportunity? Precisely because that's not the point of the rebirths. But if that's not the purpose, what happens? He says, let's continue. For it deprives the reborn being of all chance to realize why he is rewarded and punished, or to get any advantage from the lesson of the profitableness of virtue and the unprofitableness of sin vouchsafed to him or inflicted on him. Even since life seems often to teach the opposite lesson. For he sees the good suffer for their goodness and the wicked prosper for their wickedness, he is rather likely to conclude in this perverse sense, because he has not the memory of an assured and constant result of experience, which would show him that the suffering of the good man was due to his past wickedness, and the prosperity of the sinner due to the splendors of his past virtues, so that virtue is the best policy in the long run for any reasonable and prudent soul entering into this dispensable of nature. Now, I'm not going to go into detail. Simply the summary of it is this. If you don't have this memory, you cannot conclude that you should be good or you should avoid bad. In fact, if you see life, you will see mostly good people are being punished for their goodness Bad people are getting a lot of benefit for their wickedness. So you might even conclude it's better to be wicked because then you benefit more. But all of this logic and thinking is very quickly corrected when we recognize that the purpose of the evolution is not in becoming good or bad, but in the growth of the soul. And so this is what he brings us to. It might be said that the psychic being within remembers. Now there are many arguments placed to justify this idea of good and bad and moral growth. Someone, the soul remembers, you may not remember, you have to suffer, but the soul understands. But such a secret memory would seem to have little effect or value on the surface. Or it may be said that it realizes what has happened and learns its lesson when it reviews and assimilates its experiences after issuing from the body. So even there are traditions which say, at the time of death you'll look back and then you will understand why it happened. But this intermittent memory does not very apparently help in the next birth. For most of us persist in sin and error and show no tangible sign of having profited by the teaching of our past experience. So we continue the same thing, it's not helping us. But, now if we change our perspective, but if constant development of being by developing cosmic experience is the meaning, and the building of a new personality in a new birth is the method, then any persistent or complete memory of the past life or lives might be a chain and a serious obstacle. It would be a force for prolonging the old temperament, character, preoccupations, and a tremendous burden hampering the free development of the new personality and its formulation of new experience. Now, if we shift the perspective and we realize the whole point of the rebirth is for the constant development of being by developing cosmic experience, that's the meaning of your birth, and the building of a new personality in a new birth is the method of this development. Now suddenly the picture changes. For this purpose, any memory of the past life will actually become a chain. It will pull you back. It will prevent you from the new development and experience. And he lists what are the things which will come in the way. It would be a force for prolonging the old temperament, character, preoccupation. Now, three things. Your temperament is the tendency of your personality. Now, as we saw some examples earlier, the heroic tendency to rush into action would be a problem if now your role is completely different. Or the tendency to quietude and introspection would be an error if your role demanded that heroic action. But that memory of it would actually bring back all that tendency. Or character. In your character, there's a tendency to get upset, to get angry, to pick on little things. Into this we may throw certain kinds of vices. If you had in the past a strong vice, even an addiction of some kind, let's say to smoking, and you were fighting, unable to free yourself from the addiction, the memory of that returning will bring with it the full force of the addiction. And imagine now as a young child you take new birth and the memory of that comes with this force, what do? And you're fighting it all over again. What's the point of it? And then preoccupations. I may have spent an entire life doing something which I enjoy very much, let's say painting. And now I take a new personality, but how can I let go of my favorite pastime of painting? You're denying me in this new life pattern that comfort or that joy, and it binds you. So anything like this continuing would be a serious obstacle and a chain which holds you back. A clear and detailed memory of past lives, hatreds, rancors, attachments, connections would be equally a stupendous inconvenience. Now, occasionally, there are cases where a child is born and it says, I don't belong here, my family is in such and such a village, names them, he goes there and recognizes people. Now, what do? That family cannot relate to this 5-year-old child as their grandfather It's not convenient, it's very disorienting. And this new family thought they had their child, and he says he's not theirs. What do? It completely disbalances all the normal human relationships possible. But fortunately, even in those cases, after a few years, the memory fades. And you should ask yourself why. In the few cases where the memories are carried over, they fade rapidly, generally around the age of 3 or 4. Why? Because that's the time when the surface personality of the emotions is developing, and the soul puts out an imprint to erase what's coming in the way. If at all it is carried over, it is an aberration. And we have many cases in the ashram where reports of such memory were given to the mother, and the mother was serious and she said that's not good, and she intervened and the memory was gone immediately. And because of this reason, it interferes. For it would bind the reborn being to a useless repetition or a compulsory continuation of his surface past. It's not the soul's past, it is the surface past. And stand heavily in the way of his bringing out new possibilities from the depths of the spirit. If indeed a mental learning of things were the heart of the matter, if that were the process of our development, memory would have a great importance. So if the goal was development of the mental personality, not the soul, then of course you want to carry over that. But what happens is a growth of the soul personality and a growth of the nature by an assimilation into our substance of being, a creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past energies. In this process, conscious memory is of no importance. Now these 2 sentences are extremely important. He's describing what's actually happening, where is the growth taking place and how. It's not the mental, obviously. But what is it that is absorbing the growth? What happens is a growth of the soul personality and a growth of the nature by an assimilation into our substance of being. Who is developing? Not the surface personality, but soul personality. What does that mean? So surface personality is the particular bundle of thinking, habits, reactions of emotions and thoughts and even physical instincts which form the personality, which rigidify into character. But what is inside? Now if we all start a process of introspection, and I ask you to tell me what kind of a person are you truly, not the way people know you, but the way you know yourself within, or the way your best friend in life who truly knows you would describe you. What kind of a person are you there? And now suddenly you'll have a very different description. You'll say, I'm actually a sensitive person. I'm very loving. I'm caring. I want people to be happy. I want to be of help. And all the things you will describe will be good soul qualities or soul tendencies. And then after that, in inner introspection, I'm artistic, I'm creative, I'm kind. You will say, but because I am sensitive, I get upset when somebody does this. Because I am artistic and I enjoy beauty, I get angry when somebody doesn't keep things neatly. And the but is important. The surface personality reacts and has patterns which are completely contrary to the inner. And sometimes the surface reaction is because of the contrast with the inner. I want my space to be happy and joyous. And I find the assault of life to be overwhelming, and I shrink and I push back hard to protect my sensitivity. You see, a lot of little children who are sensitive in the heart will become extremely rebellious when their parents impose upon them. Too much domination, too much imposition, not enough free space to unfold your own soul's joys and aspirations. And the child becomes rebellious to a degree where everything is no, no, no. And the same child taken out of that space and put in a free space and just allowed to flower begins to breathe. And then little by little, the deeper parts of the personality begin to deploy. And all of us face this to different degrees, if nothing else from life, if not from people around us. We feel ourselves overwhelmed and we create these layers to protect. So we recognize here already two layers of personality. There is this personality which you will say, look up my LinkedIn profile. I was manager of this, I was assistant of that, that's your career, it's not your personality. Okay, what's your personality? I like this, I don't like that, I get angry with this, I'm happy with that, I enjoy reading books, I enjoy climbing mountains. No, that's not you. What are you? And now you go a layer deeper within and you find all these beautiful things. They are the first reflection you can access of the soul's personality. But it's still a reflection, it's not the soul's personality. Behind that, deep within, in the stillness of your heart, is the actual soul's presence and the particular personality that it has formed. So what is growing? He says, what happens is growth of the soul personality and a growth of the nature, the soul's nature, by an assimilation into our substance of being. How does the nature, inner nature, grow? Well, let's look at what's happening externally when your nature is growing. Over the last 5 years, maybe I've learned the skill of playing piano. Over the last 10 years, I have learned the skill of, let's say, my intellectual powers of argumentation or discourse or presentation. Over the last 20 years, my body has developed in its capacities. I have become stronger, more agile and more skillful in juggling and doing cartwheels. Now, all of this would be development of your nature on the surface. You shed the body, a bulk of this just drops with that. Let's reread this very brief sentence. What happens is a growth of the soul's personality, of the soul personality, and the growth of the nature by an assimilation into our substance of being. I'll give another example. You have been, let's say, to meetings where you met many people, or you went on a holiday to a new space, and immediately as you come back, if somebody asks you, well, how was it? You will say it was exciting, it was nice. What did you learn? And if you're a deep person, you will say, I'm still processing it, I'm still assimilating, I'm still absorbing the impact of that rich experience. How long does it take you? You'll notice sometimes days, sometimes weeks. You come back into your normal life, you're sucked into routine, but then a weekend, when you're free, you sit back and spontaneously your mind goes back to those experiences and something begins to deeply absorb, assimilate and settle into you, shaping from inside out. And maybe a month or two later, you will say, oh yes, now I can look back and that was such an enriching experience. I have grown as a person. I'm a different person. In what way? You'll still find it difficult to get words to describe it, but you can feel it. That is the change in substance of consciousness, of the personality of the soul. So he uses not soul's personality, but soul-personality, soul as personality. Into that the substantial change, the creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past energies. Now this is the next phrase. Creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past energies. Everything done, the essential result of it is absorbed. How? Two words. Creative and effective absorption. If you read casually, you will gloss over these words and not realize how important they are. What is creative absorption? What you absorb creates something new within you. You become something more. You become even someone else. Having been through that period of intensive struggle, I have now come out of it, that passage is over. I've become a new person. that creative absorption. What is absorbed is not simply added on, it creates something new which was not there before. And effective absorption means what is absorbed now becomes effective in your life. Having been through that intense training, my whole personality now faces problems of life differently. My whole outlook to life has changed and I respond to situations differently. So now I'll reread the full sentence. What happens is a growth of the soul personality and a growth of the nature by an assimilation into our substance of being. A creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past energies. And because it's substance of being, it is what you are. You could erase all the memories, you would still be the same person. And this is something very important which we're going to see shortly, why it's important. In fact, when you look back at your life, especially if you've been in the body for long enough, memories of your childhood have mostly faded. Memories of your teenage have begun to fade or have become irrelevant. Even memories of what happened maybe 10 years or 20 years ago are beginning to fade. And if somehow there was a sudden intervention and all memories until today were erased, you would still be you because that's your being. The whole imprint of the consciousness that is your personality. And it is this which now remains at the level of the soul. In this process, a conscious memory is of no importance. You could erase everything, it does not matter, because what is held is at the level of substance of being, what you become as a result of those experiences. He gives an example now. As the tree grows by subconscient or inconscient assimilation of action of sun and rain and wind and absorption of earth elements, so the being grows by subliminal or intraconscient assimilation and absorption of its results of past becoming and an output of potentialities of future becoming. So let's look at the example of the tree, and then the things he speaks of it will be so obvious in us. How does the tree grow? It does not think of what I will do. It is constantly responding to the things acting upon it, sun, rain and wind. And how is it responding? Not consciously, oh, today the sun is hot, tomorrow I must prepare for the heat. It is subconscious. It feels the heat and the heat bakes into the cells the habit of a different response. It becomes something different because of the sun's heat. The same tree now taken into a colder climate, it feels the impact of the cold and creates within the cell or responds within the cell subconsciously a response, and it becomes now the new response, the new relationship. So subconscious or inconscient assimilation of action of sun, rain and wind. Now to such a degree that inside the rhythm of the tree life, it even knows the seasonal response. Now the warmth is coming, I have to start sprouting leaves. Unconscious response. Suddenly the warmth drops and the cold hits. Oh, the leaves drop. It goes back into half sleep. Again the warmth comes. Again it starts. Now this happens in the present phase because in many cases you find the climate fluctuates very unsteadily. All in the last 20 years and for very interesting reasons. But where it has happened, we saw this for example in Punjab. The cold ended, the winter ended, the warmth started prematurely, 2 months in advance. As it came up, the leaves began to sprout and suddenly the cold hit, it dropped the leaves. Again the warmth came up, again it sprouted 3 times. And the tree must have been confused. But in the being it has developed this relationship. Warmth comes, I grow. Cold comes, I go to sleep. And it's set in the rhythm somewhere. Some of these relationships are so deep subconsciously that you cannot even explain how they know. So you look at shells. In the sea, there are shells which open during high tide and then they close during low tide, because the food comes during high tide and then it has to protect itself during low tide. Now these shells are synchronized to the local tides. Well, how do they know the water is rising? We don't quite understand, but let's say there is some mechanism. You take those shells out from the beach, take them inland at the top of a mountain, put them in an aquarium. So for a few days they continue their cycle of opening and closing as they were in the earlier location. Then there's a kind of a hesitation, something happens, they are confused, and after a few days they get back to a new cycle, synchronized to the tides that would be at that location if there was an ocean there. Amazing. They're aligning themselves to something in relation to the moon. At what level? They are not conscious. Even we are not conscious of where the moon is. And yet at a deep subconscious level, where our energies individually are connected to the entire cosmos, we are plugging into, or we are influenced by all the rhythms of the cosmos, including gigantic rhythms which span thousands of years, are influencing us, even as the daily cycle of the sun influences us, and the moon, and Jupiter, and other planets. And they're acting at some deep subliminal, subconscious level, to the extent that the form and expression of the movement of this shell is actually taking place on top of a mountain, as if there was an ocean there. All this is happening in the tree. And the absorption of earth elements, which makes for its substance. In the same way, the being grows by a subliminal or intraconscient assimilation and absorption of its results. Now here, he is not using the word subconscient or inconscient. You see, the tree as a being is fundamentally not mental and not vital. It is primarily physical and with a nervous physical development in evolution. An animal would have elements of emotional or limited mental development. In the human being, we have a complex mental personality, and the inner being is also much more evolved and awake. But where is the assimilation taking place? Not in the surface personality, at the subliminal, at the inner mind, inner vital, inner physical. The parts of mind which we are not conscious of. Take an example again. You went through, let's say, a very difficult passage of your life, and we have all been through such things. You look back at it immediately after the passage, you say, oh, I'm relieved, I'm out of it. That's all your mind is concerned with. But after 2 or 3 years, you look back at it, and then you say, oh yeah, now that I look back, I grew so much through that passage that today I am stronger, more mature, more capable, more skilled, whatever form it takes. And I'm glad it happened. If not for that, I couldn't be what I am today. At what level in your personality did you actually change yourself because of those experiences? Nowhere consciously. In fact, it took you a while to look back after 3 years to say, I have changed because of that. It happened at an inner level, subliminal. Now, the framework of personality Sri Aurobindo maps out. There is the surface personality, surface mind, which is I am thinking, I remember, surface emotions, and this gross physical body. Behind that is an inner mind in which there is access literally to all knowledge, because it connects to the whole universe. It is on those inner levels, subliminal, that the real assimilation is taking place. Similarly, the inner vital, which has deeper sensitivities, it senses things about people. You walk into a room, before your mind has looked at people, you've already sensed, the mood here is tense. And that was picked up by the inner vital and brought forward into the surface to make you aware, oh, be careful, you're heading for trouble. And similar thing happens at an inner physical, where you're not conscious of, but imprints remain. What keeps the shape of the hand, for example? What keeps the scar when all the tissue is being replaced every 6 or 7 years? A memory which is held in the physical consciousness at an inner level. And if you can erase that memory, the scar will vanish. So the real assimilation is taking place on those layers of which we are not conscious, but which are conscious of us. They even help us. For example, you have a problem, you don't know how to solve it. You think about it, and then you go to sleep, you wake up, and you have a solution. What happened during sleep was your surface thinking mind was shut for a while. The inner mind said, oh, you're worried about this, here's the solution. But there's a gap between the two. So as long as you were busy thinking, it couldn't pop out the solution. When you went to sleep and you woke up, your mind was fresh and the solution could pop out and register. Now, if you could consciously train your mind to become silent, you can actually access that inner layer and draw out from it insights. But because there's a gap, you do not consciously enter it. You only enter in some unusual states, or you learn to enter it by deep meditation. By entering consciously into your deeper layers and accessing those parts which currently are subliminal but not unconscious. So it is on those levels that this is taking place. So he uses two different words here. The being grows by subliminal assimilation and absorption, or intraconscient assimilation and absorption. Intraconscient meaning inside the consciousness the stuff is happening, which is not seen or felt on the surface. Of the results of past becoming and an output of potentialities of future becoming. So at that deeper level, all the past things are held or assimilated, which have happened in this life, and elements of the previous which are kept. And it is here also that the shaping is taking place for the future to come. The law that, so conclusion, the law that deprives us of the memory of past lives is a law of cosmic wisdom and serves, not disserves, its evolutionary purpose. So having recognized this, he now comes to the question of what is the relevance of those memories and what role they play on different levels, or what the soul brings forward. The example he takes up, which we will take up next time in the next paragraph, how exactly in the transition the retention takes place as well as the loss. Now very obviously, if you have shed a body and taken up a new body with a completely new brain, with new brain cells, everything to do with what was stored in the physical brain would naturally be lost, cannot be carried over. But if content of it at an essential level is absorbed by the soul, it can be reinfused into the new physical brain, or new physical body, or the new sheath of vitality or of mind. So in this yogic framework, we have to see three bodies that the soul will shed and take back. Having shed the physical body, the vital body is also dissolved, and the mental body, retaining now in the soul only the overall impressions from all these three. And now when taking a new birth, again gathering material for a new mental body, infusing into it, gathering material for a new vital body, infusing into it, and then gathering the substance of the physical body, which is half formed or being formed or has just taken birth, and then infusing what it can into it. So what are the mechanism of dissolution and bringing forward is discussed, and he will end that paragraph with what happens when memories are retained, what kind of memories are retained, how much of that can be made relevant, and in what way it can be accessed by a turn within into the inner subliminal ranges, and what could be found there. And this will complete our understanding of the relationship between person and personality. And then will come this larger discussion of, in the spiritual evolution, how do we carry forward that which is relevant. So this is all to place in context what we have studied today. And looking back, the thing to recall is not to give importance to memories of past lives. What is relevant for you is already present within as an essential soul imprint. What you have brought as a soul in this lifetime is a rich range of possibilities which are being worked upon to be integrated in preparation for the next step in evolution. And so what is important is what we do with what we have brought forward. And if we can consciously create in our immediate space of life a wider and richer environment for bringing forward these possibilities and developing them, it will be good. It will be helpful. And if all the effort we make can be integrated with the soul's aspiration, then everything we'll do will become relevant for the larger evolution and taken into the next life. To the extent that it is not integrated with the soul's aspiration, well, those activities or skills developed will be useful for a while, but eventually to be shed as we shed the personality in preparation to take on a new personality. Review what is important. Review what you do in life which is worthwhile truly to carry, and give it greater time and energy. Over time, just thinking about it, becoming conscious, will lead to many rearrangements and realignments of priorities, until, as part of the cultivation of our spiritual life, we will bring in every single thing we do in the day into the framework of the life's purpose and the soul's aspiration. It is at that point that our life will have effectively put into practice the principle of karma yoga, bhakti yoga and jnana yoga, when everything in life is included in the scope of the soul's evolution and done for that purpose as a consecration to the divine, or as a way of fulfilling and manifesting the divine possibilities in us and in the world. Then our life will be most complete, and we will have something rich in growth to take forward and integrate with all the work done in the past. And this we can take as our reference for the transition that we are about to have, symbolic though, of a new year, day after tomorrow. Every life, or even within a life, we go through passages and phases where we have finished with a phase of life and we begin a new phase. Rather than waiting to take a whole new birth, what if we are able to do that every year, or at least every few years? That the mother used to have in the early days a special meditation at midnight on the new year. Later that was not possible, so she would just give a message for the new year. And the goal was to be able to have practically a new birth and a new beginning afresh. We can meditate on this for a few minutes.